I've amassed this trove over the last couple of days while testing how spawn locations work for metals and stones in Ashes of Creation Alpha 2 Phase 2. I found that with a bit of planning you can easily predict respawns and make routes that will work, albeit each only temporarily, for you to get a ton of rare resources. This works for copper, for those sweet apprentice tools, but also for tin, which will be in high demand once we unlock access to journeyman tools, as well as basalt, granite, slate, rubies and emeralds. So let's get into how mining spawn rates work in Ashes of Creation. Mining nodes, and I'll be calling them nodes for this video, not to be confused with city nodes, are commonly subjected to misinformation in this early stage. Many people believe that harvesting basalt and granite will increase the chances of copper spawning and think it's about nodes having a percentage chance to spawn different resources. Others claim that higher tier resources are taking up all the copper spawns. I figured I'd do some serious testing, so I tested 3 categories. You can jump ahead if you only care about the conclusions and strategies, but I believe knowing the tests themselves is valuable for working out how to adapt when the game inevitably changes something in later phases of the testing. The first test was simple. I found a copper deposit, harvested it, and then stared at its location until it respawned to get a benchmark. That took exactly 2 hours. Once can be a coincidence though, so I set a timer for 1.5 hours and then came back to stare some more. Again, it spawned exactly on time. I've come back to that deposit every 2 hours for the last couple of days, and until recently it always spawned. Moreover, as I did a little loop after each copper harvest, I got more and more rare spawns synchronized with my clearing, so they would every 2 hours pop up just as I reached them, de facto monopolizing their harvesting to me as long as I was at the start of the route just as the first copper node spawned. At most, the route gave me 3 large copper, 1 small halcyon, 2 small zinc, 1 large zinc, and 1 large tin. All of those resources spawned as I reached them on 2-hour timers. To this, I added other nodes nearby on different timers as I found them, which required more activity, but added multiple deposits of each type to my total gain each 2 hours. I believe it would be better for a general fairness if Intrepid included a random element into the spawn timers, say plus minus 10 minutes, to ensure that you'd have to camp harder and wouldn't be able to have 6 different nodes under your guaranteed monopoly at once. I did, however, notice a bit of a deterrent over the longer term, but more on that in the third experiment. For now, the second experiment was twofold. I needed to find out if basalt and granite had similar spawn rates and if their spawns changed. So I found a nice cluster of basalt and harvested it all, then went back to the first spawn and stared at it until it respawned. That took exactly half an hour, and the entire cluster of basalt spawned as I reached their locations to do the next harvests. I repeated this every half hour for 6 hours to make sure, and then did a double take in multiple other mineral dense locations to ensure it wasn't just a bugged patch. In all that testing, all the resource nodes spawned as the same resource node again and again each time. This experiment clearly showed that there is no variation in node spawn. Each basalt spawned as more basalt, each granite as more granite, and so on. The same held true for the rare resources of experiment 1. I would always know that a spot of zinc would spawn as more zinc, tin as tin, copper as copper, and so on. To me, this disproves that there are any randomness in which resources will spawn in each slot in the short term. However, as many of you probably have, I too noticed that sometimes bug nodes spawned on top of each other. And what's up with that? So a third experiment was needed. The third experiment was about the long-term effects. Would node placements change over time? I went into this not knowing how long it would take. After all, it could be a weekly schedule, or bound to the seasons, or not happen at all. But luckily, after only 24 hours, I began noticing nodes disappearing and other ones taking their places. The most obvious ones were the journeyman nodes, as they existed until replaced by others. But at the end of my experiments, some of the paths I had created and farmed each 2 hours for a full day also stopped spawning at the expected locations. I believe there might be clusters of potential spawn locations where different nodes spawn in each 24 to 48 hours. This timescale is still too long for me to be completely sure of, as I can't leave my character AFK and filming constantly, but some nodes seem to last longer than a full day. Also, it seemed like not all locations were always occupied. Take this location where I found 2 tin nodes spawning. At the end of my testing, they didn't show up, and within 2 more hours, these 3 ruby nodes took their place. The lowest down ruby node was in exactly the same spot as one of the tin nodes had been. This to me seems to confirm that between rarer nodes there is some overlap in which nodes spawn where, not each time it refreshes, but rather on that 1 or 2 day schedule. There are also some nodes, however, that always stay the same. These basalt outcroppings have been steady for my entire experiment. If this is correct, and this experiment experiment is the one that has the least data so far. That would mean harvesting all of the basalt and granite you come across is a mood strategy for increasing the spawn rate of copper, but that it simultaneously makes sense to check places where no copper spawned previously, as it might have updated and now have multiple spawns close together for a while. I quite like this design. It feels like discovering a little treasure trove, but since it's temporary, there will always be another hunt for the next perfect farming spot and less risk of a few players monopolizing most of the resources. What should you take away from this? That depends on your level of dedication. Don't spoil your fun because something is completely optimal. If you are simply looking to be self-sufficient, you can note down a rare node, say copper, once you find it, and set a timer on your phone for 1 hour 55 minutes to remember to come back to it. Do a couple of trips back and forth while you're playing anyways, and you'll have plenty of copper for your apprentice tools. The same of course goes for any other mineable resource. But if you want what I see as the optimal way of farming, you should put a day aside to do it. Find a region with a lot of resources and wait for a rare to spawn. Remember that the rare spawn spots I've shown in this video will likely be camped more now, so recalling where you saw a spawner yourself elsewhere will be more likely to work for you. Harvest that spawn, and while harvesting, note down its respawn time on a notepad or on a post-it. Then set a timer for 2 to 3 minutes before it spawns on your phone to remember it. Spend the time while waiting for it to spawn harvesting other things nearby. Rarer versions of common materials sell decently as well, especially basalt since it's needed for some tools. Each time you find a new rare material on your route, harvest it and note down its respawn time and set a separate alarm. When your first alarm goes off, return to the first node and wait for it to respawn. While waiting, check if any of your other nodes are close-ish in respawn time to this one. If one is within a couple of minutes, try to time reaching that as it respawns. You can wait at your current node while it's up, getting their spawn times closer to each other and only harvesting it if you see another player coming or when you have to leave to get to the next node in time. Slowly you can align the spawn times of the nodes in your entire route to fit into a smooth run between them. This is disgustingly efficient. Since you're at each node as it spawns, no one else will be able to get it, and since they have a 2-hour respawn time, you can easily add a lot of nodes to your route since travel time is not really a problem. I didn't optimize this much as I tested, only including the ones that naturally spawned into the route, but still, I basically had all the rare resources of my little piece of Vera locked down. As I mentioned earlier, I quack at the holy ducks of Vera that this gets patched away with a slight randomizer on node spawn times or the like. Since I assume some players have figured this out like I have, I hope this video will help equalize the gap by letting more people in on it while it lasts. An interesting note that came up in discussion as I edited this video is that some of the nodes that mostly spawn rares do sometimes spawn basalt or granite instead. This seems to be the mechanic that will, in the future, be developed into overharvesting. As we strip the lands, the nodes normally set aside for rare resources will be prompted to spawn as granite or basalt for a while. It does seem to happen a little randomly with the node shuffles right now, but I think it's a dial that can be used to control the amount of rare resources in play in very populated nodes. For now, there's one more thing to add. This does not seem to work exactly the same way for trees. I cut down a weeping willow and came back 2 hours later to an empty spot. I'll look more into trees in the future. You can subscribe if you want to get notified when that comes up, and yes, I promised a caravan video earlier, but I got sidetracked. That one is coming too. While you wait, you can watch this video on how to get started as an artisan and get into helping your city node early. You can click on the link on the screen to watch that. Quack bless till then.